How's it going, everyone? Welcome, Eulier Gonzalez. Now, let's go to explore about Playwright, shall we? And why Playwright is something that is quite exciting. I am quite excited of this piece of technology because now it actually, when it comes to provide your services, or when a company hires you to provide your UI services as a specialist for enterprise, as the title suggests here, enterprise UI development, it is important to understand what are the goal to make this enterprise or huge code bases easy to maintain, and the key word is the maintainability. And that is, how can we now add features or change or do a refactor or a migration without the fear of breaking something, or at least reduce that fear to a bare minimum possible. Now, how can we do that? Is by understanding what are the basic infrastructure that this project or that huge code bases that perhaps we inherit. Okay, so a company hires us and then we need to look at this huge legacy code, so we can now streamline the process of maintaining with a wide range of contributors. Perhaps you want is to now start up a new project from scratch, or the CEO now decide that proof of concept, it'll be a feature in your application. So that's why we're here in this course. The goal of this is to see how to put in place the infrastructure needed to make that happen. And from that, at least to have a mental model, is to put everything here at the bottom, at the base of the pyramid, of the Maslow pyramid, right? The pyramid of needs, where now at the bottom you have is the system that we need to put in place, testing, build, and the static. And then on top of that, the processes of code review and the design documents and blueprints. And every time you get into this particular process, there are several patterns that arise. So for example, state management, architecture, and abstractions. So for example, just to briefly mention those concepts. So for example, state management. Hey, how can we now, from the UI perspective, maintain the state and keep track the state when a user is now interacting in our application? That's one. And the other is that how can we organize now this project in a way that is make it easy for us to test different components. That is clean architecture or hexagon architecture, just to mention two of them, right? And the abstraction, which is a fancy word to say, hey, the tools that we need to use in the language. So for example, is promises, is generators and iterators, or any other design pattern that we need to, whether it's creational, structural, or behavioral, and at least to have experience of building each one of them and to understand their main purpose of that, right? The creational, the structural, and the behavior. I am quite familiar with the behavior, especially with the iterator, and the observer as well. Also with the creational pattern, like factory and prototype, and with structural, with adapters and facades, or decorator, would allow you to know is add properties to a object, some sort of like a proxy. Okay, but again, this is just to describe at least briefly is the design patterns that we need to at least know that they will exist, and when something that are quite familiar with this happen, we can now apply this. There's some detractors of that, but in any case, the TLDR is at least to understand that if you are going to be a UI specialist, this is all the stuff that you need to know as a way to provide its value to the client, to the business. So because of that, now to be more succinct, to actually go into what Playwright is. So at the base of the pyramid, we now look at the testing system that we need to set up, and also the spectrum of testing, unit, component, or integration, and then E2E. We talk about is E2E. How can we now run our unit testing? Why are they useful? So they're fast, quick, they are live in their own bubble, they are isolated, right? Because they only tell you if that function actually do what it's supposed to do in the case of JavaScript. And using now libraries like Jest and most of the common methods that we can use to test these functionalities. And how can we now organize our tests as a way to now have to follow this discipline here? You define the set of functions, the set of testing, the testing logic, and then the assertion. Now, we also look at the greatest hits of these methods, like to be equal, where to be, what it's going to do is to check if they have the primitive values or if the object have the same reference in memory, whereas the to equal, it check now the structure of those objects. It means that it performed this deep equality. In other words, is hey, if this is structure, is this object structure, if this whatever nested property has is the same as this, all right. And then some others like to equal, to be equal for numeric precisions, to be equal to how do you put it? Yeah, to be equal to be instance of, to contains, to throw errors, to match object, or to match for regular expressions, object.any to check the types, object.array containing or object containing as a way to check if a subset of elements actually is in this array or objects. And how now in JavaScript objects and array plays two roles. So objects play the role of a record and a dictionary, and the arrays as tuple and array. Again, this goes beyond the scope of today's video, but then once we know how to set up our tests, and also using and also for asynchronous tests, then how can we build a system or pass that through a CI/CD process using GitHub Actions, or specifically the GitHub workflow, which allow you to define all of these different set of jobs that are run by default in parallel, and they now allow you to specify bash scripts or GitHub Actions, which is this recurring, tedious, monotonous task. So for example, like clone the repo inside of this runner, and the runner is now the virtual machine that GitHub provide to you, whether it's on Mac, Linux, or Windows. And another useful stuff is if you want to now put the to set up a build tool for your build environment, or to set up an authentication flow, or to verify the authentication for different vendor providers, right? Another useful stuff is define now a workflow. For example, if you have now a SaaS in the open source library, so define a workflow so anytime you bump up the npm version of the open source project, now it update that to the npm registry. So there's a lot of useful stuff that you can do with GitHub Actions. So then we also look at how can we define is part of this phases of the pipeline, which is the build, the build and the test. How can we do that? And because every time that we now merge or submit some change via PR, it is important to create now a this particular pipeline and pass through that, because this is something that can become quite time consuming, since they need to spin up the build process from the scratch as well as the tests. And if you want to save you time and your developers as well, we can catch dependencies. So we look at how can we do that with this command, with part of this workflow, and also how can we use is, for example, some actions, node actions, to catch that dependency. We also look at that catching live on those runners for 7 days. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that leads us to look at what are now the processes that we need to put in place to guarantee the code quality here. That somebody actually make a PR, and because you are getting distracted or because you are busy with a lot of stuff, and when it is Friday, and then you just want to get rid of all of this, you just accept that PR and then you merge those chains without even do a code review, right? Now, to prevent any of this human stuff that can happen, there are now some of this code quality that you can put now, or code review that you can now put, is all of these different checks. Hey, we want this to now at least 2 people take a look at this code review before merging, and we want to put now the let's say the team leads and that kind of stuff. We want to put him now at the responsible for merging all of those chains into the main branch, okay? And all this kind of stuff is mainly all of this stuff now starting to get into the realm of security and compliance. Again, because this is a huge topic, and I just want to brief summarize that in the next 2 minutes. That is the IT security and the compliance. For example, in the IT security, we have now 2 models. Right? We have the castle and moat, where the philosophy around this is that, hey, the threats can happen outside of this, but once the attacker cross the moats or get into, so you just practically doomed, right? So they cannot perform some social engineering attacks, exploit some security vulnerabilities, steal credentials. So to prevent that, and because Gartner, this multinational IT company, consulting company, where their clients were concerned about security, they say, hey, we don't want layer of security. We want security built in. So some of their analysts now come up with this particular model called Zero Trust Policy Model, and it follows certain principles, right? The first is, hey, let's go to now do a continuous verification and validations by now providing is to those user or admins or any other user that wants to get in here, the least privilege. So following the principle of least privilege, you only have is this set of privilege to do some stuff on the business assets, and to and because we want to continuous monitoring is all of ingress in our business assets, we also do a continuous device monitoring, And as a way to prevent now, if some attackers get in here, we want to microsegmentate all of these business assets. In other words, all of these servers and server network computers and computer networks, right? In a way that when an attacker is getting, you can think of this like if they're getting into a room, you put all of these walls so he can go from one place to another that easily. All right. How can we ensure that? By putting is now multi-factor authentications in any place where all of these different rooms communicate. You know, that all of these computer networks interact with. And this is part of the strategy that we are now actually using. So this is for describing briefly is these two security models that we have. And because now the cost of cloud computing has been reduced dramatically, and we as a workforce can be more effective at a distance, now what we can do here is to those cloud vendors actually have a challenge, which is how can we now combine network accessibility with network security? And that's where the SASE model kicks in. The secure the server access secure edge. So this follows a particular principle as well, that is the secure gateway. So they're going to expand, analyze every package that passes here, and also URL filter on the URL of whoever are making these requests. We also have the zero trust policy, CASB, which is cyber cloud access security broker, which provide you now pretty much like a physical like a physical security firm when they give you now foot patrol, surveillance, validations. But now here this broker follow this principle: data protection, threat detection, visibility, and compliance. So when the compliance is when we look at what are at least those compliance or regulations that us in the software is going to be affected by, and that is the quality management systems, which is the ISO 9001, the information security management systems, which is the ISO IC 27001, and then the FedRAMP. So this is a set of standards for monitoring and secure is good and services provided by cloud vendors. So for example, on fintech, and I think this is something quite important, all right? If you want to try to regulate a market, or at least provide some sort of guidelines to whoever getting into the market, I am in the middle ground of regulations and an unregulated market. But this is again, this is a side note. So if a government wants to actually keep up the pace of an unregulated market, they need to be in that unregulated market. So otherwise, they won't be able to keep up the pace of that kind of innovations, and therefore they will go to set all of these different rules and boundaries and kind of stuff. Now, so another compliance industry specific. So for example, the payment card, which is PCI DSS, the payment card industry data standard security, the HIPAA for the healthcare, and for different banking services. For example, you have the Bundesbank from the Deutsche Bank, as well as other regulations that are very narrow specific to industry. Then we also have the SOC, System and Organizations Control, which is conducted by the ISCPA, the American International the American Institute of Certified Public Accountant, which is a great stuff. And how can we now finally keep up the pace with the course by looking at what is the next stage of testing, which is the component testing. We can use is now testing library as a way to now test the UI elements. Testing library provide now a wrapper around this frameworks, front-end frameworks, Angular, Svelte, React, you name it. And in our case, on React, how can we use that to test if this user elements actually behave the way it's supposed to, right? So because testing library not only provides a wrapper around query methods for our HTML elements or DOM elements, also is exposed to common features that are useful for users to mimic the user the user interaction. So for example, typing, key up, click, scroll. We also look at how can we do that, and when it comes to test your component, React components, especially if you need to interact with external services, for example like Redux, how important is to recreate that state, because if you have code that you own, recreate that state. Do not mock code that you own. So this is also part of the experience of Steve Kinney, and then look at what are the type of architecture that we need to understand as a way to make this huge code bases maintainable or easy to maintain as much as possible. We have now the clean architecture or the Hexagon architecture, right? So again, this goes beyond the topic of this course, and as a way to move on to finally reach to the Playwright. Okay, we also went through how can we add accessibility to our tests using a particular library that provides you a known check of that, and the code coverage, which is test how much of your source code is tested. So if your test despite not pumping tests, or if your tests are running or are evaluating stuff that are not relevant for the logic, or they are mocking a lot of stuff, so you are separating your tests from the reality, so you're divorcing them. So of course your test won't give you any value from that. So because code coverage check now is function statements or function executions, statements executions, conditional control flow statements, for example like if or switch, booleans, how much of that value has been tested, true or false, and line of code. Code coverage is not a way of telling you that you are testing the right percentage of your code, but in other words, it's a metric that a lot of companies actually trying to use. But remember that the end goal of this code coverage is to verify, generate a report that your code at least or your tests at least now are working as and covering is the proper business logic. This is something that this is a philosophical aspect here, but again, just to shrink that, the TLDR of this user stories, whether it's the unit testing or the component testing, is to check now those user stories. Is to check that the user actually going to do that behavior, to guarantee that user behavior, right? So then we explore now at how you can mock stuff only for those codes that are not that you don't own. So code that you don't own, for example, the randomness of a function, for example, mat.random, timers, some weird or some specific sorting or random sorting elements on the UI, and API calls. So because of that, we look at how can we create spies and mock. What is the difference between spies and mock? And the spy and mock, so mock allows you to now replace the implementation of a function, and a spy do the same but for an object. So the property of an object. Now, by looking at the next steps of the mock and the spies, and testing now is timers and now API calls, how can we use, for example, this a worker to run that, to simulate that behavior before that feature has been implemented. Now we can actually we did that to implement is the MSGS, right? This web worker, this mocking web worker servers in JavaScript. And finally, of the things that we are now excited and that we want to talk about in this video is Playwright. So now how Playwrights, no pun intended, play a role into this entire UI enterprise UI development. So let's get into this. We already look at how can we now set up our how can we now set up our integration testing with Playwright here. And this was quite interesting because Steve Keeney mentioned a specific use case, right? They were busy building is an admin dashboard to manage a whole bunch of stuff for a SaaS product. Okay, so previously, because they, so if a user wants to onboard that, so you fill a Zendesk ticket, and someone from engineering takes care of that. So there is a cap of how many customers you can onboard doing that, right? And the cloud team was terrible. Okay. So they choose to do one of those mad dashes, right? So let's gonna do this mad dash. And then the API came late, so we have now an integration stuff. The integration stuff was hard, and also figuring out that design was changing. This is a challenge for big companies when you get into this. That especially as a UI developer, hey, I'm going to develop this user interface, all right, and also then I need to deal with the integration, which is kind of hard, while the design is changing, right? And this three stuff happens a lot, right? How can we rapidly get some sanity around in our code base? So here we're going to look at the 20% of the stuff that are going to make your life at least much more easy. So because these integrations, even if you write really good integration tests, if they fail, they won't give you too much detail about why, because they are far from the implementation. This integration testing, So a few browser-based integration will give you at least a confidence that everything works. Okay, so not a lot of insight where it doesn't, but it gives you a lot of confidence that your app works the way you want. And I think this is and I think this is what we want to implement here, as it is, right? That'll make a lot of sense. Yeah, that'll make a lot of sense. All right, so let's get into this. Yep, let's get into this. So we look at a particular example of how can we use that, and to me was like fantastic. At least, so if you write few really integration tests, if they fail, they won't give you a lot of detail why they fail, because they are far from the implementation. Now, with some browser-based tests, okay, with a really few browser-based integration, it will give you at least the confidence that everything works, because they are not far from the implementation. They're more closer to what end user is going to expect. So, because of that, all right, let's get into this. So here, we look at how can we install Playwright. Okay. And let me now here is to show this one.
I like this question. Add a GitHub Actions workflow? Don't mind if I do, right? Like, absolutely. Install the Playwright browsers? That seems like I get it. Now I probably haven't been cached up. That's one thing you notice,
There you go. No, but this is integration. Okay.
terrible reasons. So some things that I would like to call out that I think are super interesting for our purposes and that maybe actually is to look at how why is that test on the title? They are all AC functions. Which one about it? It's you do get a space on that, right? But it's really interesting like how you define stuff. It effectively has the same so for instance, like if you're like, hey, it's really great to talk about some nuances and coming testing sort of the labs that we had along the way. Like I don't have that. I partially there's also I do the perfect but like that's just the case. I get one more. I don't want to but like but generally
As you can see here, this is now the Playwright configuration test, right? So we first look at how can we run our tests. Okay, as you can see here is by, well, running is this is Playwright here, and actually it's going to provide you now some isolated page instance created for each test, and page are isolated between tests due to fixture context isolation. Okay, so let's get to this. Let's get to explore this. Now, WebKit require Playwright here, okay, in browser context, away in browser here, but let's going to explore this a little bit, right? At least to understand now what is doing behind the scenes, because we need to understand is this inner mechanism. So, page provide methods to interact with a single tab in a browser, or an extension background page. One browser instance might have multiple pages, but this allows you to interact with a single tab. Okay, page, as I described here. This example, create a page, navigates to a URL, and then save a screenshot. So here is actually running as this immediately invoke function expression by saying, hey, by the time you call this function, this will run this async function, which is, you can think of this as a generator. It's going to now pause the execution when it finds an await keyword, all right? And then pass control to whoever needs to deal with, and then resume that execution once that is done, right? So by the time that this WebKit.launch is done, it pass controls to that. We have now that instance. Then this context or this statement is evaluated. It now pass control to that browser new context. So it creates that stuff whenever it needs to. And then once that is done, it gives you now the context. All right. And you're gonna do now for the next line, which is again pass control to the context.next page. By the time that is done, get that and then store that reference using the page identifier and a way page to go to. All right, to navigate that is like, hey, I'm going to pass again control to that. And by the time that that is done, all right, I'm gonna resume control here, and similar to this, I'm going to now take a screenshot Once that is done, once I pass control and that is now evaluating for the page, the screenshot, we get that value, and then once that is done, all right, now I want you to close the browser. This particular flow is something important to understand, and Generator can explain that very in a wonderful way, because generators now, what they're doing is to provide now is the ability to pause and resume the function execution, the ability to now define series of flows, because now generators is this syntactic form of state machines, which you can descriptively, when you can define is this one state to another, to another, to another, to another, a series of flows, and descriptively lists out the transactions out. So because here we're using is async and await, but you can mimic this behavior with generators and understand that it is powerful, especially if you want to mimic the behavior of that. You know, and this is pretty much what it's doing here. Hey, I'm gonna get this WebKit, all right, and this is quite interesting. So what they doing, right? So what we're doing here is to now dealing the concurrency is at the application level. That's what happened. So we are now the scheduler of all of these tasks that needs to be done, and that's required also is careful programming as well. So this is also why I look at the difference between process and threads, and how now the OS runs those processes. Yeah, and how those how the OS now run those processes via the context switch. So a process needs to switch out before another can run, and because this is something that is quite expensive, since now the OS needs to maintain is the state of the process as well as the internal kernel data structure and the virtualized page, which is part of the most important expensive stuff. Since threads is less expensive because now they live inside of the process and they share now memory, doing this context switching is less expensive. However, because this is so expensive, the context switching, there are now alternative mechanisms to deal with. One of them is fiber and the other is called routines. Both of them wants to is now known as cooperating concurrency. In other words, is in order to a process or a threads takes controls, another so in order to, let me actually recap that, because I think this is the processes, intro to processes and threads, because this is pretty much what we're doing here. No, here. This is pretty much what we're doing here. Fair use, and that is, and that is the, how do you put it? And this is it. This is the context switching. the process, the alternative of context switching, which is
Some examples
fibers in coroutine.
These mechanisms trace complexity for even lower context switching.
But exactly, the mention is that they trade complexity for even context switching loss costs. But in any case, because here what we're doing is now defining is who are we going to pass control, because that it is.
In general, they are cooperatively scheduled.
They are cooperative schedule. So
That is, they must yield control for
so that they must yield control so others can run.
others to run. In other words,
The application itself handles the scheduling, which is exactly what we're doing here. And I think, and I get it, why a lot of these people actually are looking for okay. Because we are looking is at this definition, or at least way of now handling is the concurrency, handling is the execution of all of this statement that needs to be run at some point. But this is something that it mentioned here, and I think is quite important.
it is a responsibility of the application to make sure a long-running task is performed.
It is the responsibility of the applications to now breaking down, which is what we're doing here, breaking down all of this tasks periodically, which is this one. So now it's the responsibility of the applications to run a long-running task by breaking down into a small, or by yielding periodically. Because as you can see here, we're now defining is a long-running task by yielding periodically, passing control of that. I know this went beyond the scope of Playwright, but it's important to at least to close the dots here. All right. Okay. So because of that, we are not using is now WebKit, which is a specific browser that they provide for us. It's now the Chromium or Firefox, and since in our tests we just actually is writing is this and accessing the page, all right. So for example, if we run now in our test the page, but this is now a wrapper provided by the test, exactly. So Playwright now provide us is a test. Let me actually take a look at this. Now provide you a test, writing test, running and debugging test. Yep. Okay, getting started. Playwright tests are simple. They perform actions and assert the state against expectations. There is no need to wait for anything prior to performing an actions. Playwright automatically wait for a wide range of actionability checks to pass prior to perform each action. So, in other words, what you're doing here is to, at the test level, you are defining all of these long-running tests that must yield periodically. That must yield periodically.
It's a responsibility of the application to make sure a long-running task is
So it's the responsibility of or the application or the test running this long-running test by breaking down into sections, or by broken down.
the application to make sure a long-running task is performed.
So a long-running task is broken down by yielding periodically. In other words, is this a state management? It's a state machines. There is also no need to deal with the race condition when performing the check. Playwright assertions are designed in a way that they describe the expectations that needs to be eventually met. That's why in our tests right now, we don't have any await or no, we have that. We have await and all that kind of stuff. But is that wrapper, for example, here, like this, is actually now provide you all of this wrapper behind the scenes. So if we now dive deep a little bit on the test, just for the sake of understand this, let me go to the code here, the price of development here, inside of the test. Why you don't take me to there? There you got it. On the test, they're writing on TypeScript, which is great. In this test now, it's a test type, which is Playwright test arguments and Playwright test options. So what this argument, what it's doing is to join or merge these two properties. Okay, similar for this. All right. So as you can see now, test type it returns or is two options. Playwright tests are and Playwright test option. So this Playwright test, as you can see now, it contains the browser context, the page, and all that kind of stuff. All right. It contains this interface. It contains this interface. Let's take a look at this. And the Playwright worker arguments, or the Playwright worker options. Whether it's a Playwright worker arguments, which is implied from this, whether it's Playwright or the browser. Okay, so this is our test, and our test accept is a title and the body that it can be is the test body, the Playwright test arguments, or Playwright test options, and Playwright worker arguments and Playwright workers options. Right? Declare a test, which is the title and the body, or it can be the title, the details, and then the body. So again, this is now a wrapper. As you can see, this is now a wrapper here. This is now a wrapper. So test here is now a wrapper. Test is now a wrapper of the test arguments that extend from an object, and the worker args that extend from another object. And here, okay, it has now the title, the body, which can be a test body, and the test arg or a worker. Okay, test body here is this. So test body comes from the test arg. You're generating is now this type, which is can be test arguments or test info. And they're gonna return you now a promise for that. So test argument, it can be whatever argument that you are passed here. All right, on the test body. But the thing here is that now it will accept any arguments, and this is a function that is going to return is now a promise. So test body here, and we are now exploring is this. as a way to understand that the body here that we're passing here, which is this, is now a promise. Okay, this must be a promise. If you don't assign this, it will throw you now an error here. I don't think it will throw you an error because we are not using a TypeScript here to check this. But for example, if you now run the, you say, hey, npnx TypeScript compiler, let me see, help, okay, and then I want to now is this is for Bill, and I will report error reporting in type check JavaScript files, check GS. I don't think it's working because we are not running that. So npnx tsx, okay, and it found more than 4,000 errors, as you can see. But at least I just wanted to check now for this particular file called test and the example spec test, and how now that generate is a French though errors of this, because now it generate is that output exactly. So far so good. This is not what we want. Okay, I know that this is what you do, but no, it in fact generate is this JavaScript and all the kind of hooks. Not at all. Let me in fact is just go to the source control and then discard all the 41. That's right. Okay, yeah, because we ran that and we didn't want to. I just wanted to run the oh, exactly, for ESLint test example. We already have ESLint sources, right? But now we're using is ESLint. Okay. But in any case, the body must return is now that. Okay. And this is now every time you create now a test, it will give you a. So if we do this, for example, npnx of Playwright of the test an example here. They cannot recognize that. So for example, if you want to now, if you want to run this, running a single test, you can run your test with the Playwright test command, and this will run your test on all browsers as configured in the Playwright config. Exactly. The test will run in the headless mode. For that, you can also have now the UI version. You can also specify that, run a specific test. You can say, hey, I want to execute this no executable package called Playwright. Okay, Playwright test of the example. Say, hey, test example here, and this now is running all of your tests in those browsers specific. In those browsers specifying your config. So this will run your test on all browsers as configured in the Playwright config here. As it is. Alright. So if the Playwright config is this one. Test there, fully parallel, and reporters in use. Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit. It makes a lot of sense. Configure project for major browsers. And then you have all other browsers you can test here. Mobile browsers, mobile Chrome. And you can run your local dev server before starting the tests here. This is for CI process. Base URL is this. All right, keep going. Yeah, this is to see is that now with pick locator.
button does not exist. Just not exist. So.
It's because you're running the different tests.
But like not mine. Usually know the work bad shape, but like before animations happen, especially for real world. Right?
Yeah.
And like things take time. So it will see this test time for 30,000 milliseconds, 30 seconds. And so like, it become like there are this sidebar plugin. It's great when it's great. You will end with like cancel test like through. Like it is great when it works. You can get it to a weird state. That said, when it does well, it does so amazing. How we deal with it? Test fails. But yeah. So what's super powerful here is you saw using this. You saw using this stuff, and you know that like if you had like 3, 4, 5, 1 tests that went through like hit all the different tests, right? Like you know that this is I do want to like kind of just do a tour of the few things here as well. One thing that like for one of these is like actually so if you choose to use that one, see what it is, this is just stuff that like that's like as well. But the part that I wanted to go into was this correct. Where a lot of things are configurable if you want to make it very clear. You can set timeout for both the test as well as for what you expect. Fully parallel means it will spin up depending on how many cores in the computer, that many threads running the browser. Most CIC processes do just that. Like it will try twice in CIC before failing to go 0 for developing, kind of feedback loop, and hopefully protection for the test. How many workers you have. The recorder was HTML. We'll play around some stuff here a little bit. This one is probably a little more simple, which is this way you don't have to type the full URL. Don't put the protocol, but it will assume this changes the way we use. You can do interesting things with environment variables. So you could do something like, hey, do this, unless like we're in like the CIC process, or unless like I choose to trigger the state. One of the things that I have done previously is I will have the base URL for my app as a environment variable. So I can point the development server and its APIs at like bots, or I can put it at production, right? Because every backend team has to tell us so I can point out that state at production at some functions. If you don't want all the browsers, the project can just do that project plugin, you can do interesting things here as well, which is like what tests you want to run. Also, like various different. This way, you're not doing a thing. And it's going to be this one will also be somewhat useful to us, which is folder for test artifacts. Right. If only I had a way. And this one I also deeply love, and probably just comment out. It did not work with the VS Code plugin. This one, when you run the test, it will also spin out this one. Because nobody likes anybody to go through the test. So you can have it like whatever code you choose to run on.
But here we don't have that. Mm. Okay.
So by the file name, Playwright will run the spec files, PyTest will run the test files, and never the connection. If you don't like spec or you don't have PyTest, you can do it right by look at it. Let's test it out. So there are a bunch of different apps. This is basically the same.
You have full control of the DOM, bro. Exactly.
With that, we'll go through like writing a text real quick, and then I will show you that for our purposes, when it comes to the theme of our time together, we're under other things. And I will show you why I'm getting some code base. I am now so then it would have made everything else less fun. So this feels like a crescendo. Cool. So let's go ahead and like kind of look at some of the differences here. Your test and expect, this one comes from Playwright test instead of my test. You don't have a describe because it's test not describe. Grab those and we can test. It has an input field.
Do you use instant testing?
I don't think so. Yeah, no, I know that. There's like the things that you just do, and then you like random these things. What questions are people going to ask me? Input field for searching for protein names. Cool, and that's an async function. Also, like in the other repo, I gave you some code snippets. So you don't have to so there's like a hidden tree in the DSP directory. It has an input. Awesome. I should have actually called it awesome. So like what will we seek to do here? Let's write a simple test. And so first thing we want to do is should I put the base here on? It's really simple, right? Going where the spirit takes me. Did I set that base here? I did. Look at we go. Awesome. So we'll start with like await page go to.
It's like some snippets.
Search. Right. That's important. Just pass in here. There are no globals to speak of. And like, honestly, for a smoke test, like did your server start up at all? Right. Cool. And then we go that test, we can go ahead and like run it. We did have that failing test in there intentionally. That was what was hanging out for those 30 seconds. It's because I literally had that test where I tried to make it. And so we'll go ahead and give it that. Let's give it that thought. Go on wander. This was something good here before. Yeah, okay. Cool.
So now I have total control of that.
If you have more than one monitor, let's see, because everything's failing me at this point. But let's take a look. So yeah, you can hover over and get a sense of everything on the page and what the selector is. The other really powerful thing that I absolutely love is I wonder, because I got some of it highlighted already. In this case as well. I can do page dot get by role, and I can do like input, button or something like that. One thing, things are being.
But also, this has come from the testing library, man.
Highlight, like the thing in the browser as I was typing it, so I get like the visual feedback as well. You get by testing the search. So let's kind of show what this would look like. Page. Oh yeah, there you can see it, right? I'm just typing, and it knows like.
And it knows
that
highlight.
Based on where my cursor is in VS Code. If I have a matching selector, it shows it for me in Chrome. And that, I should not be that amused by something that simple. And here I am, right? And so I've got that, and it will show it to me. Now, so the integration is super important. What I am trying to kind of iterate towards is showing how we can use this to get like a lot of like sensibility around stuff. So just to show you real quick, I can also like grab this. You see like that works. And you can even see like what selector matched it, like a partial match in this case on the placeholder did get it for me. So like little changes shouldn't break your test. Like Playwright, more so the testing library is built to be somewhat resilient despite the struggle bus that I just wrote on for a little bit with the plugin having an errant port running. But for whatever I'm running, I get that visual feedback as I move into the code, what I have, and stuff along those lines.
And this is also because some part of the testing wrappers, part of the testing wrapper that they provide you.
I can then like say like, oh wait, and we should do search input dot type, and we'll do Bika, and we'll do
exactly, because behind the scene is using another wrapper of this.
Look for a link. And look at the background. Look at the background. If I'm like, what was it again? Like I get all of the help. Probably moving my cursor like ruins it. You have to trust that like on a bigger monitor or like 2 screens, it's cool though. Get roll by link. Let's make that happen again. Now it's going to tell me. We'll do name. Keep it true. Cool. And do I hit that button again and have it found? We'll find out. Unclear versus the restart. What's going to happen there? If I have to do that, I will do it quickly so we can kind of like pull the straight into the station. But let's see if I can kind of get to the main point without that. It's like one of those things. 6 million times. But I probably have like some other parent process on some process ID that other than a restart really wants to launch. But we can also run that test, and I'm going to turn off that. With I will get an error if I try to run the test, and I want to show you that error. MX Playwright test. It's going to yell at me that something is running on that port, and it's going to say, hey, if that's cool with you, you don't want to make sure that we're the only thing on that port, you can have this setting to reuse existing server. It's true. I use this a lot because I'm developing, and I like don't want that's really great for like CI/CD. I spin it up, I want to run it, but like if I have one running, just use that one, and so I will do that.
On the configuration, take a look at the.
We'll pop that setting in as well.
Reusing existing server.
We should be able to run the thing, and we'll run it across all them, and 3 paths that we can use it, right?
Okay.
As we should.
All right. Okay. So that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.